Hello, and welcome to The Essential Reads. My name is Isaac, and my goal is to bring to you a bunch of classic audiobooks in an easy and accessible way. We are continuing with Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, and this is Part 3, Chapter 6. And my god, guys, this is the chapter. Let's begin. I don't believe it! I can't possibly believe it! A puzzled Razumikhin kept repeating, doing everything within his power to refute Raskolnikov's arguments. They were by this time drawing near to Bakileyev tenements, where Pulcheria Alexandrovna and Dunya had long been awaiting them. Every moment or so, Razumikhin would stop in his tracks in the heat of the conversation, excited and confused by the simple fact that for the first time they had begun to talk about it without any equivocation. Well, don't then, Raskolnikov replied sardonically with a cold and casual smile. As usual, you didn't notice anything. But I was weighing up every word. That's because you don't trust anyone. I agreed that Porfiry's tone was a bit strange, though. And what did you make of that shabby character Zamyatov? You're right, there was something particular about the way he was carrying on. But what was it all about? Eh? He's done a bit of thinking overnight. I don't agree. If they had that idiot notion in their heads, they'd do all in their power to try and hide it. They'd try to play their cards close to their chest in order to be able to pounce later on. No. What they were doing just now was brazen and ill-advised. If they had some facts, real facts, that is, or at least some well-founded suspicions, then they would really try to play a cat-and-mouse game in the hope of making an even bigger haul. And they'd have searched my place long ago, too. But they've no facts, not one. It's all a mirage, a conjecture, just a fleeting idea. They're trying to make me lose my nerve by means of effrontery. Or perhaps he was annoyed about not having any facts and burst out with all that because he's so irritated. But there may have been some intention behind it. I think he's a clever man. Perhaps he was trying to frighten me by showing me that he knows. There's a peculiar kind of psychology involved there, brother. Oh, but all that doesn't bear thinking about. Don't remind me of it. I know, it's insulting. I understand the way you feel. But now that we've begun to talk straight, and I'm so glad that we have, I'll admit to you now that I've noticed they've had it for ages. This idea. During all this time. Only in the most tenuous form, of course. As the merest creeping suspicion. But why even that? How dare they? Where are the roots of these suspicions of theirs? Oh, if you only knew what a furious rage I've been in. Good Lord. Just because a poor student, crippled by poverty and hypochondria, on the brink of a severe illness and delirium, which may have already begun at the time in question, take note of that, suspicious because of the poor state of his health, proud, conscious of his own worth, who has been in his room without seeing anyone for 6 months and is dressed in rags and tatters and boots with no soles, appears before some wretched local policeman, and puts up with their assaults upon his dignity, whereupon they wave an unexpected debt under his nose, the overdue promissory note of Court Councillor Chebarov, there is a stink of rotten paint. The thermometer reads 30 degrees Réaumur. There's no air in the place. The room is jammed with people. They're talking about the murder of someone he had visited not long before, and all this on an empty stomach? How could he have failed to pass out? And to make that the basis of the whole thing, the devil take it. I understand how annoyed you must feel. But if I'd been in your place, Roger, I'd have laughed in their faces, or, even better, I'd have spat in the ugly mugs of the whole lot of them, with a good gobbet of spit, too, and let fly a couple more dozen gobbets in the proper direction, and left it at that. Go on, spit on them. Keep your spirits up. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. I say, he put that rather well, Raskolnikov thought. Spit on them. But he's going to question me again tomorrow, he said with bitterness. How can I have a showdown with them? I feel bad enough about having lowered myself to Zamyatov's level in the restaurant yesterday. The devil take it. I'll go and see Porfiry myself. I'll exert some family pressure on him. I'll make him tell me everything, the whole story. And as for Zemyatov, at last he's guessed, thought Raskolnikov. Wait! Razumikhin shouted, suddenly grabbing him by the shoulder. Wait! You're wrong! I've just realized you're wrong! What kind of a trap was that? You said that the question about the workman was a trap. Look, this is what it's all about. I mean, if you'd done that, how could you possibly let on that you'd seen the apartment was being painted? And that you'd seen the workmen? Oh no! You'd have said you saw nothing, even if you had seen them. Who's going to make an admission like that against his own interests? If I had done that deed, I would most certainly have seen the workmen in the apartment, Raskolnikov said, continuing his reply unwillingly and with evident disgust. But why say a thing that harmed you? Because only mujiks and the most inexperienced novices deny everything outright when they're being questioned. If a man has even the slightest bit of intelligence and worldly wisdom, he'll try as far as possible to admit to all the external and undeniable circumstances. Only he'll try and find other reasons for them. He'll introduce some special and unexpected feature of his own, one which gives him a totally different significance, and puts them in a new light. Porfiry may easily have reckoned that I would give some sort of reply and say I'd seen the workmen for the sake of plausibility, and then insert something by the way of an explanation. But I mean, he'd have told you at once that there couldn't have possibly been any workmen there 2 days earlier, and that consequently you must have been there on the evening of the murder, between 7 and 8. He'd have caught you out over a trivial thing like that. Yes, that's what he was counting on. That I wouldn't have time to consider, and would hurriedly make the most plausible reply I could think of, forgetting that 2 days earlier there wouldn't have been any workmen there. But how could you forget something like that? It's the easiest thing in the world. It's over utterly trivial things like that clever people are caught. The cleverer a person is, the less he suspects he'll be caught out over some ordinary thing like that. In fact, the way to catch a clever person is to use the most ordinary thing you can think of. Porfiry is not at all as stupid as you might suppose. If what you say is true, he's a bastard. Raskolnikov could not help laughing. At the same moment, however, his own animation and the eagerness with which he made this last explanatory remark seemed strange to him, bearing in mind the fact that during the whole of the preceding conversation he had maintained a sullen air of disgust, apparently for ends of his own, and from necessity. I'm getting a taste for certain aspects of this, he thought to himself. But almost at that same moment, he suddenly grew agitated, as though an unexpected and disturbing thought had occurred to him. His agitation increased. They had now reached the entrance to Bakalaev tenements. You go in alone, Raskolnikov said suddenly. I'll be back soon. Where are you off to? I mean, after all, we're here. I must... some business. I'll be back in half an hour. Tell them when you get up there. Well, it's as you please, but I'm coming with you. Oh, so you want to make my life a misery too, do you? Raskolnikov exclaimed with such bitter irritation, such despair in his gaze that Razumikhin lost heart. For a while, he stood on the front steps and gloomily watched Raskolnikov striding rapidly away in the direction of the lane in which he lived. At last, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists, he swore to himself that this very day he would squeeze Porfiry till the pips burst, and went upstairs to soothe the mind of Pulcheria Alexandrovna, who was, by this time, in a state of alarm at their long absence. When Raskolnikov arrived at the building where he lived, his temples were soaked with sweat, and he was breathing heavily. He hurried up the staircase, went into his unlocked room, and immediately shut the door and set it on its hooks. Then, in a kind of mad fear, he rushed to the corner, to that same hole in the wallpaper where the objects had lain that day, thrust his hand into it, and for a few moments probed it thoroughly, fingering every nook and cranny and every fold in the wallpaper. Not finding anything, he got up and took a deep breath. As he had been approaching the front steps of Bakalaev tenements just then, he had suddenly had the notion that some object, one of the little chains, or a cufflink perhaps, or even just a scrap of paper in which they had been wrapped, with the old woman's handwriting on it, might somehow have slipped away and got caught in some little crack, in order to suddenly glare before him as a piece of unexpected and irrefutable evidence. He stood still, seeming to muse, and an odd, self-disparaging, almost vacant smile fleeted across his lips. At last he took his cap, and quietly went out of the room. His thoughts were jumbled. Musing, he walked out through the front entrance. "There he is! That's him!" a loud voice shouted. He raised his head. The yardkeeper was standing by the doorway of his little cubicle, pointing straight at him for the benefit of a short man who had the air of an artisan, and was dressed in a waistcoat and something resembling a dressing gown. From a distance, he looked very like a woman. His head, in a soiled peaked cap, hung limply forward towards the ground, and indeed the whole of him seemed bent and hunched. His flabby, wrinkled face set him to the other side of 50. His small, bloated eyes stared sullenly, sourly, and with resentment. "What's going on?" Raskolnikov asked, going up to the yardkeeper. The artisan gave him a surly, oblique glare, looking him over with close, fixed attention, taking his time. Then he slowly turned away, and, without saying a word, walked through the gateway out to the street. "What's going on?" Raskolnikov exclaimed. "Oh, that fellow was asking if there was a student who lived here. He gave your name and wanted to know whose apartment you lived in. You came down here, I pointed you out to him, and off he went. Whatever next?" The yardkeeper was also somewhat bewildered, but not greatly so, and having thought for a little while longer, turned and went back inside his cubicle. Raskolnikov rushed off in pursuit of the artisan, and immediately caught sight of him walking down the other side of the street, still with the same unhurried, even gait, his eyes fixed on the ground, as though he were thinking of something. He quickly caught him up, but kept behind him for a bit. At last he drew even with him, and looked into his face from the side. The artisan noticed him immediately, looked him over quickly, but then lowered his eyes again, and thus they continued for about a minute, side by side, and not saying a word. "Were you asking the yardkeeper about me?" Raskolnikov got out at last, but in a voice that was somehow rather faint. The artisan made no reply, and did not even look at him. Again they said nothing for a while. "But why did you come and ask for me, and then not say anything? What's the matter?" Raskolnikov's voice petered out. Somehow he had difficulty in articulating his words clearly. This time the artisan raised his eyes and gave Raskolnikov a black, menacing look. "Murderer!" he said suddenly, in a voice which, though quiet, was clear and distinct. Raskolnikov continued to walk at his side. His legs suddenly went horribly weak. A chill ran down his spine, and for a moment his heart almost froze. Then it suddenly began to beat as though it had been released from a catch. In this manner they walked for about 100 yards, side by side, and again without saying one word. The artisan did not look at him. "What you talking about? Eh? Who's the murderer?" Raskolnikov muttered, barely audible. "You are a murderer," the artisan said, even more distinctly and reprovingly, with a smile that expressed something akin to hate-filled triumph, and again he looked straight into Raskolnikov's pale face and rigid, staring eyes. At that moment they both arrived at the intersection. The artisan turned down the side street to the left, and went on his way without a look to either side. Raskolnikov stayed where he was, following the man with his gaze for a long time. When the artisan had gone about 50 yards, he saw him turn around and look at him where he stood, motionless, at the same spot. It was impossible at that distance to be sure, but Raskolnikov fancied that once again the man smiled his cold, hate-filled and triumphant smile. With slow, dragging steps, his knees trembling, and for some reason feeling terribly cold, Raskolnikov went back and climbed the stairs to his closet-like room. He took off his cap and put it on the table, and for about 10 minutes stood next to it, motionless. Then, in exhaustion, he lay down on the sofa and stretched out on it painfully, uttering a weak moan. His eyes were closed. Thus he lay for about half an hour. He thought about nothing. To be sure, there were a few vague thoughts or fragments of thoughts, vague notions, without order or coherence. The faces of people whom he had seen back in his childhood, or whom he had met somewhere on only one occasion, and forgotten all about. The bell tower of the V Church. The billiard table of a certain inn and an officer playing billiards. The smell of cigars in some basement tobacco shop. A drinking den. A black staircase, completely dark. Running with slop water and scattered with eggshells. And from somewhere, the ringing of Sunday bells. Objects spun round, changing place with one another, like a whirlwind. Some of them even caught his fancy, and he clutched at them. But they faded. And in general, he felt a sense of some heavy weight within him. But it was not excessive. At times, it even felt good. He was still affected by a slight shivering, and this, too, almost felt good. He heard Razumikhin's voice and hurried footsteps, closed his eyes, and pretended he was asleep. Razumikhin opened the door and stood on the threshold for a while as though he were pondering something. Then he quietly stepped into the room and cautiously approached the sofa. Nastasia's whisper was heard. "Don't bother him. Let him have his sleep. He can eat later." "Indeed so." Cautiously, they both went out and closed the door. About another half hour went by. Raskolnikov opened his eyes and again threw himself back, clasping his hands behind his head. Who is he? Who is this man who comes up from under the ground? Where was he? What did he see? He saw it all, there's no doubt of it. But where was he standing that day? And where was he looking from? Why has he only surfaced now? And how could he have seen? Is that possible? Raskolnikov went on, quivering, his blood running cold. In the jewel case Nikolai found behind the door. Is that possible too? Evidence? You missed the 100,000th hyphen in the text, and there's a piece of evidence the size of an Egyptian pyramid. The fly was on the wall, and it saw. Is it really possible? And with loathing, he suddenly felt how weak, how physically weak he had grown. I should have thought of this, he reflected with a bitter, ironic smile. How could I have dared, knowing the person I am, knowing what it would do to me, take an axe and bloody my hands? I should have thought it out in advance. But I did, he whispered in despair. At times he would stop dead in the face of some thought. No, those men aren't made like that. The real overlords to whom all things are permitted. The real overlord to whom all things are permitted ransacks Toulon, commits a massacre in Paris, forgets an army in Egypt, throws away 500,000 men in his Moscow campaign, and talks his way out of Vilna with a clever remark. And after his death, they put up statues to him. And that means that everything is permitted to him. No, men like that don't have bodies, but lumps of bronze. There was one sudden, an almost extraneous thought which almost set him laughing. Napoleon, the pyramids, Waterloo, and the disgusting, emaciated widow of a registering clerk, an old crone who lends money and keeps a special trunk under her bed. How could Porfiry Petrovich ever digest that? How could any of them digest it? Their sense of aesthetic would get in the way. Would a Napoleon go crawling under an old woman's bed, they'd ask. Go on, don't be so stupid. At moments he felt he might be delirious. He would lapse into a mood of feverish entrancement. The old woman is rubbish, he thought heatedly and with violence. It's possible that the old woman was a mistake. But she's not what it's all about in any case. The old woman was just an illness. I wanted to get my stepping over done as quickly as possible. It wasn't a person, but a principle that I killed. I killed the principle. But I didn't step over it. I remained on this side of it. All I was able to do was to kill. And the way it's turning out, it seems I didn't even manage to do that. The principle? Why was that imbecile Razumikhin calling the socialists such rude names just now? They're hard-working, business-like people. They occupy themselves with the common happiness. No, life has been given me once, and it won't come along again. I don't want to wait for universal happiness. I want to live my own life, too. Otherwise, I'd do better not to live at all. I mean, look! All I want is to not have to walk past a hungry mother clutching my ruble in my pocket as I await the advent of universal happiness. As though to say, j'apporte ma pierre à l'édifice nouveau of universal happiness. And that gives me peace of mind. Why have you let me slip past? I mean, I'm only going to live once, and I also want to. Oh, I'm an aesthetic louse, that's what! He added suddenly, bursting into laughter like a crazy man. Yes, that's what I am, a louse! He continued, battening onto the idea with malicious joy, rummaging about in it, playing with it and amusing himself with it. If only because of the fact that, for one thing, I'm now arguing that I'm a louse. And because, for another, throughout the whole of the past month I've been pestering all beneficent Providence by asking it to be a witness that I wasn't undertaking my project in order to gratify my own fleshly lust, but that I had in mind a splendid and agreeable aim. And because, for yet another, that I purposed to observe the greatest possible degree of fairness in its execution, weighing, measuring, and employing all the operations of arithmetic. Of all the lice I could find, I selected the most useless one, and having squashed it, proposed to take from it exactly as much as I needed in order to make my first step, no more and no less. And consequently, what was left would have gone to a monastery, according to the terms of her will. And finally, I'm a louse because, he added, grinding his teeth, because I myself am possibly even more loathsome and disgusting than a squashed louse, and knew it in advance that I'd tell myself this only after I'd squashed it. Is there anything that will stand comparison with a monstrous plan such as that? Oh, the vulgarity of it! Oh, the baseness! Oh, how well I understand the prophet with his sword on horseback! Allah commands, and trembling mortals must obey. He's right, the prophet, when he mounts a decent-sized battery across some street somewhere and blasts away at righteous and sinners alike, without even bothering to explain. Obey, trembling creatures, and do not desire, because that is no business of yours. Oh, never will I forgive that old woman! His hair was soaked with sweat. His lips, which had been quivering, were parched. His monstrous gaze was fixed upon the ceiling. My mother, my sister, how I have loved them. Why now do I hate them? Yes, I hate them, physically hate them. Cannot endure their presence close to myself. Just a while ago I went up to my mother and gave her a kiss. I remember that I could have embraced her, thinking that if she found out then, could I really have told her then? I'm capable of it. She must really be the same as I am, he added, thinking with an effort, as though he were struggling with the delirium that was enveloping him. Oh, how I hate the old woman now! If she came back to life, I'd like to kill her again. Poor Lisaveta. Why did she have to go and turn up when she did? I say, that's strange. I wonder why I hardly ever think about her. As though I never even killed her. Lizaveta. Sonia. Poor meek souls with meek eyes. Dear souls. Why aren't they crying? Why aren't they moaning? They're sacrificing everything. Their gaze is so meek and quiet. Sonia. Sonia. Tranquil Sonia. He dozed off. He thought it strange that he could not remember how he had ended up in the street. It was already late in the evening. The twilight was thickening. The full moon was shining brighter and brighter, but the air was somehow particularly suffocating. Crowds of people were passing through the streets. Artisans and people who had been on business were going home. Others were loitering about at a loose end. There was even a smell of dust, slacked lime, and stagnant water. Raskolnikov walked along, sad and preoccupied. He was very well aware of having come out with some plan, of there being something he had to do, and to do quickly. But what it was he had forgotten. Suddenly he stopped, and saw that on the opposite pavement a man stood, waving to him. He crossed the street towards him, but the man swung round and walked on as though nothing had happened, his head lowered, not turning round, and not showing sign of having beckoned to him. Steady on. Was he beckoning to me? Raskolnikov wondered, and began to catch the man up in any case. Before he had gone 10 paces, he suddenly realized who it was, and felt a shock of fear. It was the artisan from earlier in the day, still wearing the same dressing gown, and still as bent and hunched as ever. Raskolnikov walked behind him at a distance. His heart was thumping. They turned off into a lane. Still, the man did not turn round. Does he know that I'm walking behind him? Raskolnikov wondered. The artisan walked in through the gateway of a certain large apartment building. Raskolnikov quickly approached the gateway and began to stare in, wondering if the man would turn round and beckon to him. Sure enough, having passed through the archway and emerged into the courtyard, he suddenly turned round and again seemed to wave to him. Raskolnikov immediately walked through the archway, but when he reached the courtyard, the artisan was no longer there. That could only mean he had gone up the first staircase. Raskolnikov leapt after him. Sure enough, 2 flights further up, someone's regular, unhurried footsteps could be heard. It was strange. The staircase looked somehow familiar. There was a window on the first floor. Sadly and mysteriously, the moonlight shone through its panes. Here was the second floor. Aha! This was the apartment where the workman had been painting. How had he not recognized it at once? The footsteps of the man walking up ahead of him died away. He must have stopped or hidden somewhere. Here now was the third floor. Ought he to go any further? What silence there was in here! It was terrifying. But he went on. The noise of his own footsteps frightened and disturbed him. God, how dark it was! The artisan was doubtless lurking in a corner somewhere up here. Ah! The apartment with its door open onto the landing. He thought for a moment, then went inside. In the hallway, it was very dark and empty. Not a living soul, as though everything had been moved out of it. Quietly, on tiptoe, he moved on into the sitting room. The whole room was brightly lit by moonlight. Everything was as it had been before. The chairs, the mirror, the yellow sofa, and the pictures in their frames. An enormous, round, copper-red moon was looking straight in through the window. It's the moon that's making this silence, Raskolnikov thought. What it's doing right now is trying to obtain the answer to a riddle. He stood and waited. Waited for a long time. And the more silent the moon, the more violently his heart thumped, until it actually started to become painful. And all the while the silence deepened. Suddenly, there was a momentary, dry crack, like the sound of a breaking splinter. And then everything sank into stillness again. A fly that had woken up suddenly swooped and beat against the window pane, buzzing plaintively. Just then, hanging on the wall in the corner between the little cupboard and the window, caught sight of what looked like a woman's housecoat. What's that housecoat doing there? He thought. I mean, it wasn't there before. He crept up to it and realized that there was apparently someone hidden behind it. Cautiously, with one hand he moved the housecoat out of the way, and saw there was a chair in the corner there. And on that chair the old woman was sitting, all doubled up, and her head hanging down, so that no matter how hard he looked, he could not see her face. But it was her. He stood over her. She's scared, he thought, stealthily freed the axe from its loop, and struck the old woman across the crown of the head with it. Once. Twice. But it was strange. She did not move at all at the blows, as though she were made of wood. In fear, he stooped close to her, began to examine her. But she inclined her head even lower. Then he bent right down to the floor and began to look up at her from below. Looked and froze. The old woman was laughing, fairly shaking with quiet, inaudible laughter, exerting the utmost control in order that he would not hear. He suddenly fancied that the bedroom door opened the merest slit, and that in there were more people, laughing and whispering. With all his might he began to hack the old woman about the head, but with each blow of the axe, the laughter and whispering from the bedroom was getting louder and louder, and the old woman was swaying about all over with silent cackling. He rushed to escape, but the hallway was now full of people. The doors of the other apartments on that flight were wide open, and on the landing, on the staircase, and wherever one gazed below, there were people, their heads pressed together, all looking, but all of them keeping out of the way and waiting, uttering no word. His heart contracted. His legs would not move. They were rooted. He attempted to scream and woke up. He took a deep, hard breath. But it was strange. The dream did not yet appear to be over. The door of his room was wide open, and on the threshold, a man who was a complete stranger to him stood examining him fixedly. Raskolnikov had not yet managed to get his eyes completely open, and for a moment he closed them again. He lay on his back and did not move. Is this still my dream, or isn't it? He wondered, and once again imperceptibly opened his eyelids the merest fraction in order to take a look. The stranger was still standing there, continuing his intense scrutiny of him. Suddenly, he stepped cautiously over the threshold, closed the door carefully after him, waited for a moment, never once taking his eyes off Raskolnikov, and quietly, without fuss, sat down on the chair next to the sofa. He placed his hat by his side on the floor, leaned on his cane with both hands, and lowered his chin onto them. It was clear that he was prepared to wait for a long time. As far as Raskolnikov could make out through the blinking of his eyelashes, this man was of advancing years, square-built, with a thick, light-coloured, almost white beard. Some 10 minutes went by. It was still light, but the day was drawing to a close. In the room there was complete silence. Not even from the staircase came a single sound. There was only the buzzing and struggling of some large fly as it swooped and beat against the window pane. At last it became intolerable. Raskolnikov suddenly raised himself on one elbow and sat up on the sofa. Right. What you want? You know, I had a feeling you weren't asleep, but were just pretending. The stranger replied in a peculiar tone of voice, laughing easily. Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigailov. Permit me to introduce myself. Thank you so very much for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, share, all that jazz. And if you really enjoyed, do subscribe, because there is more to come. We've still got 3 more parts of this book and an epilogue. That is the end of part 3, however. If you're listening on podcast, please leave a review, as it helps get this in front of as many people as possible, and reading your reviews really makes my day. If you want to support the show further in a non-monetary way, you can just listen to the show while you're sleeping on Spotify and help me get the monetization requirements that I need to be paid there as well as on YouTube. If you want to support the show in a more direct way, click up here to the link now on screen, or to the link in the description box that will take you to a website called Ko-Fi. It's just like a donation thing. You can donate directly to me, and it goes directly to supporting this show. Once again, thank you very much for listening. And until next time, bye-bye.